You're listening to the Dyslexia and Me podcast, and today I'm joined by Kelly Young, who is a neurodiversity coach and consultant with over 20 years' experience across mainstream education, specialist schools, and pupil referral units. She specialises in neurodiversity pre-assessments, SEND advocacy, and EHCP support, combining her professional expertise with lived-in experience as a neurodiverse adult and parent. So Kelly, can you tell us a little bit about your journey into your work and how your own neurodivergence has shaped the way that you support others?
Yes, of course. So it was actually my son Joshua who led me into this work, navigating his neurodiversities from a very young age. He was statemented by 4.5, which he's 21 now. So you can imagine that was unheard of in those days. So we learned very, very quickly the constant struggle with the education system that didn't understand him. We didn't understand him at the very beginning because you're not given an instruction manual for any child, never mind a child that has neurodiversity. And it completely changed the way I saw things, and actually have him growing up and going through lots of different assessments, lots of different schools that didn't fit him, the system trying to put him into a square peg into a round hole. It was a real struggle. And actually I started looking at myself then. Wow, right. Well, that's why I didn't really get on in school. That's why I was bullied in school because I spelt my name wrong, and I used to really struggle with writing in school, and I was never picked up. And it was all that if only he would concentrate more, if only she would put her mind to it, if only she would do this. And having Joshua around has allowed me to reflect on that and learn so much more about myself. So, I've got a diagnosis of ADHD, OCD, autism, sensory processing. I don't have a diagnosis of dyslexia, but I know I am dyslexic, and PTSD because of the stress that I went through as a child in school. It definitely triggers me now when I hear about children being misunderstood and failed within school. Luckily for me, I'm quite a headstrong person, so I've went into full, mummy bear protection mode, and this is what is going to be best for my child. And some parents aren't like that. They have no idea where to start with the system because it's not very self-explanatory how to work your way around it. So I started doing my degree 8 years ago, and I've done law, health and science, criminology. I've done mental health, ADHD, autism. I'm doing mental health as well. And I think I've just got to a point now where I've learned so much so that now I can help other parents, and help their children, because it's all about the children. Children are so important. They only have one childhood, they only have one education, and it's so important that they're getting the right help. It's assuring for parents that come to me that I've actually been there. I've been there, I've done it. I'm not somebody who doesn't have a child within the SEN system. There are a lot of people out there that try and help others that don't have a child. So it does make a difference, I feel, because it's lived experience as well as professional experience.
Yeah, I think that lived experience is so important to parents. And having worked in schools as well, you're kind of got that position where you can see things from both perspectives and you know how little changes can make such a big difference.
Yes.
So that is fantastic and would be really supportive to so many families. So you work across the wide spectrum of neurodiversity. How do you explain neurodiversity to parents or adults who are just starting to explore it?
So I believe that neurodiversity is the brain evolving. I believe that it's about learning in ways that suit the individual rather than learning how other people think the brain should learn, because we all don't fit into the one box. We all have different brains and we all need to learn differently. A neurodiverse brain wants to explore, it wants to be curious, it wants to focus on the interests that it has in its brain rather than all of the subjects. I don't think that's a flaw. I think it's just a different operating system. And I help parents and families see that, neurodivergence isn't about being wrong or broken. It's about recognizing the unique wiring and working with it. So often I hear children say to me, and I'm trying to get rid of this word when I speak to them, I'm just weird. I'm just weird. That word pops up a lot. And I say by the end of our session, I'm going to try and get you to change that word weird to unique, because you're not weird. You're just different. And that's perfectly, perfectly good, because actually being different is exactly how it should be.
Yeah, that's it. So you've had quite a wide range of experience, both in education, in mainstream schools, specialist schools, and PRUs, which are pupil referral units. What have you seen change over the course of your period in those establishments? And what do you still think needs to change in education at the moment?
So I've seen some progress, some good, some bad. I think it's a little bit of a balance, really. Some schools are becoming more nurturing and more aware, and they're putting more training in for mental health and um, neurodiversity. But I've also seen a lot of decline in, things like the arts and outdoor learning, which actually neurodiverse people really need that. And I think they're becoming more enclosed and being asked to sit down for longer during the day. The creative space is shrinking. I've witnessed neurodiverse children being screamed and shouted at for behaviours that are part of their neurodiversity, rather than being an attention seeking behavior. So I think, there is a lot more change needed. I actually went yesterday I was asked to speak at the Children's Education Scrutiny meeting at Devon County Council. I went bright red and my anxiety really came out, because it was really intimidating. However, they were very thankful of my input, if you will, because I firmly believe that the system needs to change. It's completely out of date. It doesn't support children with special educational needs. We need more movement. We need more flexibility. We need more understanding. The teachers are struggling. We need more training. I believe there's 2.5 hours of a teacher training in neurodiversity. That's not enough when you've got roughly 50 to 60% of a classroom that have got an additional need of some type. The EHCPs, I work with a lot of families that are trying to get their EHCPs, and they're not being done within 20 weeks. Children are being failed. Tribunals are 57 weeks to wait for a tribunal. And of course, local authorities are refusing an EHCP at the first hurdle to save money. I get that there's a lack of money, but also I generally believe if we can change the structure of the curriculum to a more flexible approach, a more learning style approach, we wouldn't need as many EHCPs, because it wouldn't be so rigid, and children would be able to express themselves and be able to learn how they need to, rather than being put in a box. There are so many children talking with their feet now that they're not coping with in school. Then emotionally based school avoidance popping up all over the place. Only the other day I helped a parent because their child, who is on a reduced timetable, had an anxiety attack, said to the teacher, I need to go home, I need to phone my mum, to which they were told, you're not going home, you've got to stay here till the end of the day, which is completely against the agreement that was put in place for them to be there in the first place. So that children are being told they're wrong all the time, they're not good enough, or they're being misunderstood, and that rejection then builds into rejection sensitivity. Then we've got trauma, then we've got self-harm, and I think it's just a big spiral, actually. So I think big change needs to happen within the education system.
My experience is that a lot of primary schools seem to be more nurturing. Then when the child gets to year 6, the primary school kind of starts to cut back a little bit. But then when the child moves up to secondary school, that's when problems and the difficulties kind of escalate a bit, because maybe that nurturing approach isn't there as much. Or could it be also the fact that primary schools are generally not always, but generally much smaller than secondary schools. And if you're going from, I don't know, a school that had, say, 400 children in them across receptions through to year 6, and then you go to a secondary school with 2,000 children in them, for a lot of young people, that would be incredibly difficult, whether they are neurodivergent or neurotypical. And I guess the children with that neurodivergence have that additional struggle in that environment.
For sure. And I think, again, I think the jump is huge from being in one classroom with one teacher, this is where we stay, to jumping into, you have to move around, you have to do this, you have to walk on the left side of the corridor. I remember it quite clearly. You have all of these different teachers that you have to remember. You have all of these different books that you have to remember. The jump is huge. And also what I found as well in primary schools is that yes, they are more nurturing, but also and especially with dyslexia, they won't put a child forward for dyslexia screening generally within a primary school because they feel that the child is too young to be testing them. So everything gets moved up to secondary school. And of course, secondary schools get completely overwhelmed with, hang on a minute, we haven't got any paperwork for this child, because in primary school, they're not picking up on any needs particularly. And I think it's due to funding, and it's harder with all the paperwork because there's not enough hours in a day for these children that are coming through with all these neurodiversities for each child to have the support they need. It's taking up too much of a teacher's time. So I don't believe it's a teacher issue. I think it's a much bigger issue.
That's it. And with the screenings that happen in schools, it's not a case of that the teacher can just screen a child while the rest of the class are doing something else. That is another member of staff that would be responsible for that. So you're just thinking of that funding issue. It is a big thing. It's not quite as simple as, let's have that screening. So can you explain what your neurodiversity pre-assessment is and why it can be such a powerful first step for families and children?
Yes. So I call it a neuroprofile assessment, pre-assessment, because actually I'm looking at the whole child. I'm looking at the whole brain as to how that works. I'm looking at the whole picture. So I look at, ADHD, autism, sensory processing, OCD, PDA, ODD. I look at dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia. It'd be amazing how many teachers have no idea about dysgraphia. And actually, a lady who I spoke to yesterday at Devon County Council, who's quite high up within the education board, she hadn't heard of dysgraphia either. I think the training is definitely needed. So this is why it's so important to have a pre-assessment, because I can pick up on things that other people aren't picking up on. It helps families and schools understand what is going on within the child, even if they don't want a clinical diagnosis. A lot of parents don't want a clinical diagnosis. It's not need a clinical diagnosis isn't needed with a neuroprofile assessment, because I can give recommendations as to what would be best for the child within school, what is best for the child at home. I can signpost to the GP and say, if I find out the child's got really bad anxiety or we've got lots of OCD traits, I can write to the GP and I can say, please can we investigate this, and it speeds that along. It can support EHCP applications. I've had several of my reports used at the tribunal and the EHCP has gone straight through because they're very in depth. So they're usually between 15 and 25 pages long, and we literally cover everything. And the amount of parents that have said, I didn't know that about my child. It's a real eye-opening experience, but it's not a tick box exercise. It's more one-to-one as we're doing now. And it's more an investigative procedure. And because of my autism, I'm very good at picking up undertones of what is going on. So it's my superpower, I suppose. I'm really good at reading children. They open up with me because I'm not speaking in a language that they don't understand. My language is quite simple because of my dyslexia. And I've always been that way. I've always been made to feel quite bad about that, actually. But knowing more about dyslexia like I do now, I don't get embarrassed about the fact that my vocabulary might be quite simple, because it doesn't take away my intellect, if that makes sense. And I think children can appreciate that, so I can level with them. And it's, it's about clarity and confidence. It gives the child confidence as to what they need, and if we can give them what they need, then they'll flourish in the environment.
But the relationships that adults can build with children is so vital, isn't it?
For
And I
sure.
think once children feel safe and feel as though they can talk to an adult who isn't mum or dad or carer, that can be really supportive for the child. So as both a professional and a parent, how has your personal experience influenced the way you approach support and advice for children with dyslexia or other neurodivergent conditions?
So figuring out that I had dyslexia really explained a lot, and it kind of, I understand now. And I said earlier, I spelt my last name wrong in school. In school, my name was Googe, as in Googe Street in London, and I spelt the E and the G the wrong way round. So for years and years and years, my name was Good Egg. And I was, it really affected me, actually. Looking back, I think, poor girl. And it can really affect a child when you're in that environment with other children making fun out of you because of spellings or the way you speak, etc., etc. And it doesn't just affect English, it also affects maths. It can affect the way that children understand word maths problems. They're wondering, well, why don't I get that? Because I'm good at maths, but I can't understand a word maths question. It isn't just about spellings. I think it's very pinpointed in, oh, you mustn't be good at spellings. I mean, I was actually pretty good at spellings. It wasn't the spellings that I had an issue with. But it affects processing, it affects memory, it affects language, it affects confidence. And now I know that about myself, I can put others at ease and show them that with the right support, it isn't a weakness, it can be a strength. Dyslexic brains think differently, and that thinking differently is invaluable. It's valuable. I help the children find the tools that work for them, writing in different ways, using technology, choosing fonts that are easier to read, building confidence. And, so I've written quite a few books now, which something I never thought I would ever do, because writing was never my thing in school. I really struggled with it. And actually I think I've got 9 books on Amazon now. Not because I've used AI to do them, but because I've had technology help me get my thoughts into paper, which I could never have done before. But now we have the technology, there's no excuse for not supporting anybody in school.
That's it. And I think we've come such a long way with technology but we do need to teach children how to use the technology that we've got. So the assistive technology, we can't expect to just give a child an iPad or a laptop and just say, there you go, that will solve your dyslexia. We have got to really show them and coach them through that process, haven't we?
For sure, for sure. And I'm always saying to children, especially if I've picked up dysgraphia, for example, I'll say to the parents, right, we need to get them doing some touch typing games, make it fun, because the more they do it, the better it'll be. And I remember, so even on my son's EHCP, he's got dysgraphia, and even in the specialist school that he was in, I was there every week saying, why is he not using a laptop? Why is he not doing touch typing? Why is this not happening? And it would be a constant fight back. No, he needs to use a pen and paper. He needs to write. And I would say no. And we went back and forth, back and forth. And of course, the years went by and he never learnt that. We did some at home, but without the backing of school, it breaks it. When you've got a neurodiverse brain, if you're not having it as regular at home, in school, and you've got 2 people going against each other, it doesn't sit in the brain, in a dyslexic brain. You need the school and the families to be in a relationship where they're both on the same page. And of course, I feel that's also quite a big issue, because a lot of the time schools believe, because that's the way that they've been told that they need to teach, they don't listen to the parents about what is best for their children. And I think that's something else that needs to change.
I think teachers can be in a really difficult position, can't they? They've got so many things put to them that they have to do, which come from above. So schemes, new policies, whatever it may be, there are still only so many hours in a day, which can make it really difficult for teachers to put what is needed in place. And like you say, when it breaks down between a parent and the school, then it is really difficult for the child and it puts them in a very difficult position. And as a young person, you want to believe everything mum says, but what if the teacher is right? In the child's mind, that is a difficult one to manoeuvre, isn't it?
For sure. And it's confusing, and especially if a child is already dealing with undiagnosed, unsupported neurodiversity, that any more confusion is just going to send them into overwhelm. And I think that's probably where a lot of this EBSA is coming from, is because there's so much overwhelm and there's so much to do. There's so much pressure. For both teachers and parents and children. There's just pressure everywhere. And I think definitely from above, Ofsted level, we need to start being far more flexible with our teaching so that
Yeah,
everyone can be happy. Because learning should be fun, right? Everyone
that's
should be
it.
having fun. Yeah.
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 I think we need to really go back to that. Let's actually get that enjoyment in learning and not have to focus on these targets that
For sure.
schools are trying to work towards, because they know that if they don't meet the targets, they get Ofsted to come in. If they don't get a good rating, they get re-inspected. Then staff leave because they don't want to have that pressure. And then it's a real vicious circle for the
For sure.
school.
For sure. For sure. Yeah.
You specialise in SEND advocacy. So what does that actually look like in practice?
So advocacy must be calm, clear, and consistent. It means I stand beside families, not speaking for them, helping them to be heard, giving them advice, giving them support, whether that be, actual paperwork support or emotional support. Whatever support they need, I'm there. It's translating that complex jargon that you get from schools and teachers and local authorities that some parents won't understand. It's about helping them understand what their child really needs. It is also about holding the local authority and schools accountable in a respectful but firm kind of way, because sometimes things do slip under the radar. It's support and strategy, and sometimes it's just being that person in the room who won't back down, and I've got a bit of a reputation for not backing down.
It's such a valuable supportive service that you provide families, because I think that the SEND code of practice is such a long, huge, the technical document that to understand that as a parent, when you've got lots of other things, you've got lots of worries about your child, it is hard. So what do you think, if schools could just do one thing differently to better support children, what would that be?
Early screening. I'm a big believer of getting some early screening in, but not just for neurodiversity. I also think that we need earlier screening in learning styles, because I'm a big believer in children learn through their learning styles rather than being sat in a room, everybody be doing exactly the same thing. I think, if we can give every child access to dyslexia friendly tools, such as different fonts, coloured overlays, speech to text, but not just the one child with dyslexia, have it so that it's accessible to all children. So it doesn't become, oh, I don't want to look different, because that's something else I come across, is a lot of children don't want to be different. They want to fit in. And of course, then they start struggling because they learn that way. Make supportive tools for neurodiversity typical within a classroom. Fidget tools, normalise that support. But I don't think children should be made to sit still all day at a desk. I think that goes against the natural behaviour of a child. Even in secondary school, I don't think that children should be sat down listening. I think they should be more hands-on. I thoroughly believe in learning through doing, gardening, cooking, sewing, exploring, growing your own vegetables, learning through the environment. going back to the learning styles, we need to embrace the children's style, not just one model. I again forward a pilot school proposal to Devon County Council, which includes working through different learning styles, which I believe would save a lot of money. And as we know, we're in a bit of a SEND crisis in regards to funding. But I put some figures together, and I think if we could change all schools into the pilot school that I've proposed, I think we would save a lot of money, and I think a lot more children would be in school. But it's not been agreed yet. I'm fighting to get this pilot school up and running so that I can then show how it works, how the figures would work, how much money we would save, and how children would be happier within that environment. So yeah, I would like to see the whole school system changed, actually.
Well, that sounds a fantastic pilot project, and I wish you all the very best with that. So
Thank you.
there is a early screening bill currently as well, isn't there,
That's
going
right.
through
That's right.
Parliament, which I think will be fantastic. But are we going to be able to actually give teachers the tools then of what they do when they get the outcomes? Because we don't want to be in a position where we're just screening whole classes and then that being it. That's right. Well, we've screened now. That's it. We need to be able to have the resources to do and the knowledge to do something with the findings.
For sure. And I think, and that again comes into where my pilot school comes in, is yes, we will screen, but actually learning styles is so important, because without a diagnosis, for example, for each child, if you can put children in their learning styles rather than age, I believe that there wouldn't need to be such supportive tools, and that wouldn't take a big shift from what the teachers are doing now into different learning styles, because actually a lot of the teachers are starting to bring in different learning styles within their lessons, and some of the teachers I've spoken to have said actually easier to teach within a learning style model. But of course there isn't the research there, and without the research we can't go forward on that. Going back to the screening bill has been tried to go through 2 or 3 times before, and it hasn't gone through yet, and I think it's probably because of the money that is going to be needed after that to be able to put those accommodations in place.
So we've spoken quite a lot today about different areas. How can parents protect their child's self-esteem whilst they're navigating assessments, reports and label?
Yes. I think they need to look at themselves. How is the relationship that they have with their child? Is there complete trust with their child and them in their relationship? Because if there isn't complete trust there, that's going to give barriers to be able to help them, because children need to know that they can trust their parent, because a lot of self-esteem issues actually come from generational trauma, rejection sensitivity. And of course, I mean, I remember mine, it was very much, well, you're not doing what the school says, that your grades aren't good enough, this isn't good enough, that's not right, you've spelt that wrong, blah 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 blah. And you always made to feel like you weren't quite enough. So if a parent can change the way they speak to their children, I think that's definitely the first hurdle of raising their self-esteem. So you need to build trust, not fear. They need to praise the effort, not the perfection. So for example, and I get that, teachers don't have time. They have 35 children in their class. They're working through the quickest way they're looking at, but they're looking at the negative. That's not spelt right. That's not right. That's not right. Because time is an issue. That's not a blame on teachers. And it's the same with parents, because there's that pressure. And actually, we don't need to look for the mistakes, So if there is a story that is beautifully written, the content is fantastic, but there's spelling mistakes, rather than picking up on the spelling mistakes, look at the content and say, that was a really lovely story. I loved where you went with that. Shall we sit together and, work through some of your spellings, rather than, well, that's not spelt right. That's not spelt right, because it's inbuilt in us to want to improve our children. If children feel confident, they'll want to be better. They'll want to learn more. If they're constantly put down at the first hurdle, they're just going to stop. And I think that is another issue within schools, and confidence, self-esteem, we need to celebrate what they're great at rather than looking at the negatives all the time.
That's it. So small tweaks in language and celebrating the effort can have such a huge impact. Can you tell listeners how they can connect with you?
Of course, you can find me at neurodiversitysupport.co.uk. That's my website. I also offer a free support call. It's a 10-minute free support call. So if you've got any urgencies that you just need a quick 10 minutes, that's free. I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn, and my phone number is on my website.
Well, thank you very much, Kelly, for the conversation. It's been really fascinating, and I'm sure that so many listeners will find it really beneficial.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
I hope that you've enjoyed listening to Kelly's story. All of the links are in the show notes, so please go and check her out. Thanks to everyone that's tuned in to today's episode. Please don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast, and I'll see you all next time.